This is the Alembic Files, and I'm one of your hosts. I'm in a good mood today. Al.
And I'm Theo, and this is a return to where we left off once upon a time. I think we left off at the Reconstruction era, Al. There's a lot we're not told there.
That's an interesting chapter of our history. It probably as critical as the inception of the country because, not even 100 years into this supposed republic, I think you could say that the Civil War eviscerated the United States to a certain extent and made it subservient to external forces, but of course behind closed doors or behind the curtain, however you want to mention it. And it also did much to expand the notion and the actuality of centralized government getting bigger all the time. I'll just leave it there. So, you go ahead. I pull some stuff also, but take us through this if you would.
Well, I have before me the entire one of the two books by James Montgomery that are available online. This one is The United States is Still a British Colony. I have it before me. I printed it up off of a PDF file. And what I'm looking at right now is Chapter 1, Will the Real Government Please Stand Up? There is much he writes about it and documents actual history here about the Reformation and what exactly went on. One of the most fascinating things is reading the transcript of President Johnson, who, of course, he took over when Lincoln was assassinated. President Johnson gave an impassioned speech warning the Northern Rump Congress, who were taking over, warning them not to do this, that it would forever destroy the country, and that what you were trying to set up down in the southern states is a military dictatorship, and the what was the title given of whoever the leader was, that military governor down there. He said that we are giving that person more power, more absolute despotic power than any monarch in Europe has wielded for the last over 500 years. And he goes, you got part of the transcript here. Montgomery doesn't provide it all. What he does provide is just, it's moving, it's stirring. Reading this, Johnson was really adamant, but they overrode him. And it's surreal to read this stuff. You almost wish that President Johnson, would have taken it to the street here if he really had some courage. I guess he didn't quite have that much courage. But this helps to shed light on why Andrew Johnson was almost impeached.
Right. There was something, obviously, that was not setting well with even his own party. Let's remember something, too. We can talk about this later. We probably will. But Lincoln was not in favor with very many people. If there's ever, I think, the greatest similarity between Lincoln and Kennedy is that both presidents had uncountable enemies. And with Lincoln, his own people, his own party, didn't like him. And they were ticked off because he ended the war too quickly. And they were making money on it. There was a whole thriving business going on, which we'll get into some other time again. And it was making money for a lot of people on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. So they considered, as you had said last time, Lincoln too conciliatory. And there were actually at one time 5 assassination/kidnapping plots against Lincoln. One of the plots hatched by, like I said, his own people. So, yeah, absolutely. And Johnson, of course, may have been also too conciliatory. And it goes just beyond making the money. Now, after the war is over, it's over. But do we want to stomp the piss out of the Southerners? I guess so. I mean, it really was, I think, an act of extreme meanness.
I'm looking at. Let me read a bit here of what Johnson of what Montgomery writes here. Despite the fact, this is Montgomery writing now, despite the fact that the southern states had been functioning peacefully for 2 years, this is after the war concluded, and had been counted to secure the ratification of the 13th Amendment, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, which provided for the military occupation of the 10 out of the 11 southern states. It excluded Tennessee from military occupation, and one must suspect it was because Tennessee had ratified the 14th Amendment on July 7, 1866. The act, the Reconstruction Act, further disenfranchised practically all white voters and provided that no senator or congressman from the occupied states could be seated in Congress until a new constitution was adopted by each state, which would be approved by Congress, and that's part of Congress. The act further provided that each of the 10 states was required to ratify the proposed 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment must become a part of the Constitution of the United States before military occupancy would cease and the states be allowed to have seats in Congress. Once you deny a Republican form of government to one state, much less 10, then you deny it to them all. You have violated and therefore destroyed the 1780 Constitution contract. We've been under military rule ever since then.
Correct.
But we should talk also about what was it about the 14th Amendment that was deemed so heinous that all of the southern states and 2 of the northern states, all the senators voted against it. They would not ratify it.
Was that Jersey and Ohio?
Yes. So those representatives were thrown out as well in the North.
You know, as far as I know it, I don't get too extreme with this, but it would seem that the 2 key elements, and I don't have it in front of me, you might have the verbiage before you, but one, it really strengthened the idea of forget states' rights. That's not happening. That was very important that get through because, let's face it, they did not want any kind of secession again. And, of course, it never has been, and there never will be, by the way. So in that sense, it strengthened the idea of a centralized government. Again, this is something that wasn't desired at the formation of this country, but we got it anyway. Here again, it gets strengthened. And also, because what does it do? It makes states' citizenship subservient to you as a person, a citizen of the federal United States. Is that correct?
Americans used to be citizens of their state first and then federal citizens second. Then it reversed it so that you're federal. You're federalized first, and then your state citizenship is subordinate to that.
I'd like to give an example. It may seem a little bit pedestrian, but that'll turn out to be a pun as well. Take, for instance, people get all upset about the national ID card. And I guess we may get a card in addition to the other pieces of documentation that we carry on our person or are supposed to carry on our person to identify us. Now, we have had 2 national IDs. One is called your Social Security number. The other is your driver's license. And I'll give you an example. They talk about you as a person in the eyes of the incorporated government. If you take a look at your driver's license, your name is in all caps. That's the other persona, I guess we could say, that you referred to the other day, that there are really 2 of you. There's a flesh and blood you, and there is the person, which is, if you want to say, an employee and a slave of the incorporation known as the United States of America. But what I was getting to is that you have a license that's issued by a state. Now, I've had 7 licenses, one from 7 different states. The number that I was issued upon my first driver's license in New Jersey is the same number I have now in Florida. And it was the same number I had in Iowa and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Vermont. So the thing is, you think it's a state document in a sense, and it's issued by the state, no doubt. But it is a federal document, and that does give you the privilege to drive, if you want to, outside the state and on federal roads.
On the King's highways.
Exactly. Now, the other thing about the 14th Amendment I want to get to also, and this becomes, I guess, more pivotal as time goes on, and that is it has that clause about not aiding rebels. Loosely what I was thinking about in the 14th Amendment, the third subsection, and it's a lot of blah, blah, blah in it, but it says no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, and I want to just pull some stuff out of there because it's got like one sentence and 17 clauses, who shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, the government, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Later on, where that comes in is that we are defined as the enemy pretty much around 1933 with Roosevelt and a revamp of the Trading with the Enemy Act, and that's all part of what took place under the Banking Act. And it goes on and on. But the extrapolation there of the 14th Amendment then is that no one can give us aid if we are the enemies, if we are the rebels, as it states in the third subsection. So in other words, when you go to court, federal court, that judge is not on your side, let's put it. And this also goes to the root of why patriots can't figure it out. When they go into federal court, they want to be their own counsel, and they try to use the Constitution as protection or remedy, and they are not entitled to it. We have been defined as the enemy of the state, if you will.
Or they tell their lawyer who's working against them to use the Constitution.
Good point. The thing is, then sometimes in these cases where people have tried to expunge themselves from the Social Security, I should say the IRS, the tax, try to get out of that system. Sometimes they do bring a lawyer in, and it's like if you bring a lawyer in, you're screwed because you got two lawyers and a judge who are working for the state. No matter what anybody says, you kind of get caught like in midstream. And there's a case maybe we'll get to sometime later, very current case that somebody has been watching, and this thing blew up on the individual who was trying to say he was not good for having to pay tax. At any rate, this all goes back to why patriots can't figure out why you can't use the Constitution as a protection in federal court, be that as it may. This idea of an expanded government not good for the citizen, and of course being defined as a rebel for the rest of the existence of this country.
And then also that the citizens can no longer question the national debt. So they can have their endless wars, perpetual wars in the 20th century later on, all financed by debt.
This is from The Informer. I'm just picking it up. It said, they, meaning the government, even wrote in the law that the signature card you sign when opening a bank account, unbeknownst to you, states in the 35 to 38 page contract that they are to give to you, but don't. That is the card. That you assume, that means you and me and everyone else, you assume the debt of the United States. And the Informer writes, this is unconscionable under the commercial law that you were never informed. This is your promise, a subset in legal terms, which obligates and binds you to pay the debt of the United States by becoming the surety. So, in essence, we're good for the debt. We are debtors from the moment we slide down the birth canal and are awarded the Social Security card. And then eventually when you go to work and you get your first 1040 or 1099.
We number our children at birth now.
So there you go. I mean, as far as we are good for the debt. And it even says in the 14th Amendment, I don't have it up any longer, it says that we're not to question the debt. Oh, okay. So here's a credit card, government. You do whatever you want with it. Just get back to us when you want us to pay.
Here's an interesting excerpt from Montgomery. All right, so it's clear that at least the northern senators who were behind the 14th Amendment before it passed, they were somehow thinking that it would pass, that it would be ratified. It wasn't. The amendment fell short of passing the House and the Senate. And then Montgomery writes, the next action taken by the northern states, at least most of them, will go down in history as the most unlawful act ever taken by any government in the world. Since the amendment would not pass lawfully, the northern states decided to rip the 1787 Constitution up and take over the government. How did they do this? They told the southern states that refused to vote for the amendment they no longer were members of Congress, denying lawful states suffrage in the Union. In order to get the amendment through Congress, the northern senators also removed a seated senator from New Jersey to give them 2/3 in the Senate, and they counted 30, even then they counted 30 abstention votes in the House as yes votes to pass the 14th Amendment, observing how a renegade group of men from the northern states had taken the Constitution into its own hands and was proceeding in willful disregard of the Constitution. On the 15th of January, 1868, Ohio also, and then New Jersey, voted to withdraw their prior... So, yeah, Ohio later kicked in and said, we're not going to vote for it, and so they got rid of the Ohio representative as well as New Jersey. So they attacked their own in the north, too. It's clear they really were gung-ho for this 14th Amendment. And here's where I think it ties in with Dark Union, that book by Guthridge and another professor.
Yeah, Neff and Guthridge, yep.
They document how people like us know, especially when a country is at war, the government is working hand in glove with the bankers behind the scenes, and it's really the bankers who are in charge. And the way they wanted, these senators were so adamant about getting the 14th Amendment passed, especially with its clause that citizens could no longer challenge or question the national debt, and that they were later on, it opened the way, as you said, to have the citizens be declared enemies of the state. It just reeks of a backdoor bankster deal.
Well, they run the show. I mean, that's why we were going back to the beginning of mercantilism and commercialism. It goes right back to the bankers.
Yes.
You know, they found a way to make money on money without doing anything, set themselves up as needed in any kind of society like lawyers are, and it's a great scam. But they run the world, and that should be
getting... And they're parasites. They produce nothing.
No.
Like lawyers, banking, lawyering, a few other occupations we could think of today.
And we understand that both banking and lawyering have become part of the fabric of this country as well, and we all have to be involved in it, all have to be to a certain extent, but still it wasn't really what you would call a wholly sanctified industry, neither one. But it's there now. It's you're never going to get rid of it, and I think it should be getting painfully clear that from this point on, we're talking about right now in 2013 and onward, that under whatever guise they wish to rule, they're the ones who are going to run this show. And as we get closer to a one-world government, one of the first things I think that will be done, and I think that's happening right now, would be the institution of a single monetary system. Is that good or bad or indifferent? I don't know. I mean, there's certainly no more promise or chance in it for any of us, but that would be the first tying element to unite all nations under a one-world government. That's after we get into regionalism with the unions that are springing up as we speak.
Yeah, and it's always, of course, going to be based on unjust weights and measures, paper money or digital money now, nothing of value behind it. Yeah. Although the men in charge, the oligarchs in charge, they will and always shall have the silver and gold with them on their person.
Well, I think about all the courses taught in college about economics and such.
Yeah, I know where you're going.
I know, and I have to laugh. I mean, it's been a rigged deal from the beginning. Now, it's been good for a lot of countries and a lot of employees thereof, but it's this bit about Keynesian economics or the London School or this or that. Give it a rest. It's been a planned economy from the very beginning. You
can throw all that out in one sentence. All those college courses you just referred to, throw them out. And again, sum it up in the one sentence: he who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, where I'm going with this is, as much as I understand people love to discuss this, argue it, debate it, shows how smart they are, and it's always good to have that kind of like debate going on because it seems to substantiate the existence of nothing. But right now, just as you had said, I mean, I'm laughing. I mean, I'm being somewhat, I guess, well, certainly sarcastic, but tongue-in-cheek to a certain extent. I don't think there's any money anymore. Whatever constitutes money, if it is gold and silver or whatever, the bankers have it. All we're doing is passing around worthless paper and trading electrons. That's all it is. I mean, there's not even, like you said, there's not even any promissory notes that we call money floating around anymore. There's nothing to back it. The only reason why it's working is because it has the momentum of believing, of all that use it to believe that it works. So I think what will happen one fine day, we'll wake up and find out that the whole house of cards across the world has been kicked out from under, and we'll be in some kind of global economic crisis, everybody. So I think, in a sense, that we're on borrowed time. And I hear all these things about trying to get back and paying off the debt, which we can't pay off. I mean, come on, folks, stop. But this is all, I mean, it's like I said about Wile E. Coyote, the Warner Brothers cartoons. You know how he'll cross a canyon on what he believes is a tightrope, because the Roadrunner fooled him. And he does fine until he looks down and realizes he doesn't have a tightrope underneath him. And he doesn't have a net below, and he's really in trouble. And a second later, right down to the bottom. And that's the same thing here.
Our monetary system.
We're crossing the canyon without a tightrope. We believe that we're crossing on a tightrope because everything seems to be worked. But in a minute, it just gets more ridiculous. 73 was probably when they stuck the knife into anything that really was of a certain kind of school of economics, when they got rid of the gold in 73. And also that was a time when from a lot of different backgrounds and disciplines, and I'm talking about, and I don't want to be too vague about this, but from everything from really economics, banking, to sociology, it was understood in 73 something happened. And from that point on, the tide that lifted at one time both the rich and the poor boats, all of a sudden wasn't lifting the poor boats, but the rich boats kept going higher. So at 73, you can see a departure between the rich, the middle class, and whatever you want to call it, the lower class. Now you have divergent lines, not lines going in the same direction.
About every decade in the 20th century is another one of, like 73 was, as you said, maybe real big landmark in that. And also, before that, in 1964, is when LBJ took the silver out of our U.S. coins. And that's when the sandwich coins, the clad coins were invented. Yeah, after 64.
And, we talk about presidents, but I know you believe this as well. And that is, the president doesn't do anything on his own volition. He doesn't make any choices. Yeah. He's put in there. He's told what to do, just like Obama now. And they always talk about, in the second term, a lot of radical things happen because they know they can't get reelected. Well, that's for our consumption. But the deal is, because we expect that, that's when the real good stuff happens in a two-term president's reign. And I mean, it is happening as we speak. So I have nothing against Obama. He's as much of a whore as every other president that ever sat in that office. They do the bidding of the people who do run this world and this country. That's why we say we don't vote anymore, because the people who run this country don't run for office.
To invest your ire or your love or your adulation, anything, to invest any emotion in the president, and including now Obama, it's like investing emotion into Kermit the Frog or name your puppet. It's a distraction. It's a show.
Yeah. What's interesting is that the acrimony between those who support, or those who were Democrats and those who were Republicans, the supporters thereof, the voters and such, whatever, as that acrimony deepens, and it is certainly deepening, it's interesting because more and more draconian things are going to be done to us, but we're too busy hating the other party, so that whatever Obama does, or what he's given to do, will be applauded by the Democrats just because he's a Democrat, and the Republicans will hate it just because he's a Democrat. And that happened in the 8 years with Bush before that, and on we go.
Did you ever happen to read the novel, and it was a series, but The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
No.
It's pretty amusing, and they made a movie out of it, too. I think the author is, if I get it right, Douglas Adams, I think. I think he's a British guy. It was interesting, and it was humorous. It's there was one of the parts I remember the most, because of the obvious metaphor that I got, that told me this author, he kind of knows the score when it comes to governments. He's talking about in the future where you have a a universal government, kind of like in Star Trek, the Federation.
The Federation.
It said that the presidents of the universe were selected not for any skill, not for any talent at all, and they really didn't have any real power, but they were selected for some type of quality, whether it's being obviously obtuse, say like a Ford, or anything, name it, bombastic. The presidents were selected for some quality that would attract the people, that made them targets of the ire of the people, and so that the people would be easily able to vent on this single person rather than on the entity behind them, the whole structure behind them that was the real power. And I got a chuckle out of that because I was thinking, that's obviously this author gets it, and that's a metaphor for governments today, including and maybe especially the U.S.
Yeah, and that's just the way it goes. I would say we haven't had, well, whatever statesman we had, we lost along the way. I think there was a final drive by some who realized what was happening and weren't signing on, probably in the 50s, right after the end of World War II, and tried to bring to light some movements, some directions that they, the honest politicians, thought was not good for the people of the United States, but they were obstructed at every turn. And I think at that point, those who came in afterwards kind of understood you do it this way or you don't stick around.
Let's go ahead and ruin the Patriots' Day some more with their mythology about the founding fathers and whatnot. We're talking about how the bankers have owned this country since its inception, at least since the American Revolution and a little bit before that. But recall, and I have it in front of me where Montgomery goes into this, there were two actual reasons for the War of 1812, and we are not told those reasons in school. We're told, you remember, what was it? The British were kidnapping American sailors at sea and impressing them into the British Navy, right? You heard that in school?
Right.
And we were outraged at that, so that was the War of 1812. That's not that was the Cowboys and Indians story. The real reason it was twofold. Number one, we mentioned this a little bit in the last show, but in 1811, the charter for the first national bank of the U.S. ran out, and it was clear that the people, the American public, did not want to renew it, so the politicians weren't going to renew it, and Britain said, oh, no, you don't. And that was one big reason, maybe the main reason. There is a second important reason, though, and that is, and this is really Twilight Zone surreal history, but the documentation is right before me. There was an original 13th Amendment, not the one that we see today. The original one called for, what it did is the clause in the Constitution which prohibited any title of nobility didn't have any teeth. There was no, if somebody did try to take part in our government who had a title of nobility, there was really no penalty for that, though.
Right,
so the original 13th Amendment put some actual teeth in that, and as Montgomery writes, when you're a lawyer, ultimately you are an esquire, which is a lower-ranking nobility in Britain, and so you couldn't be a lawyer and be part of Congress in America.
Right. To put that straight line, what Theo's referring to is that if you held the title of nobility, you couldn't participate in government.
And the lawyers, at least the upper echelon of lawyers, are tied into the British bar. The lower and middle-ranked lawyers don't know this, but the upper ones do. And they are beholden to Britain. And this would have prevented them from taking part in the government and aiding and abetting the fleecing of the American people with the National Bank. And Britain was not about to allow this. And so isn't it funny what you saw in that war? The British troops come in, invade D.C., and they burn down the Capitol building, and James and Dolly Madison have to flee for their lives. And And then after the Brits burn the building and burn the documents, the information, then they just leave. When do you see in warfare an invading army capture the opponent's capital city and just let it go like that? There was obviously something else going on. I mean, you think when Napoleon invaded Moscow, if he actually took Moscow, or Hitler, were they just going to give it up?
It depends what the script said.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and in those two cases, why in the world do you guys go to Russia to fight in the winter? Not a good idea. But anyway, that's another thing. The War of 1812 is so multifaceted, and we have so little public information on exactly what it was all about. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of funky things going on at that time as well. I remember seeing a Canadian History Channel version. Yeah, and I mean, William Henry Harrison was leading troops into Canada, or at least with the idea that they would grab all the land between Detroit and Buffalo.
Twice they tried it.
Yeah, and so here we are, getting all upset about any kind of impingements upon our liberty, so to speak. But when we go off and try to be imperialistic someplace else, no, that's okay. We're supposed to do that. I mean,
and we got our butts kicked both times.
Yeah, because what it would have done is it would have given us obviously sole possession of a number of the Great Lakes, and we had that land bridge between Detroit and Buffalo. Where if things had gone differently back then, you wouldn't have to go through Canada. You wouldn't be on the Queen Elizabeth. You'd be like on like 105 or something. I don't know.
I remember it was about 15 years ago or more. I happened to be watching some TV talk show, or just a little bit of it. And one of the guests was Mike Myers, who's the comedian from, I don't know, he's done a lot.
Well, he was on Saturday Night Live, and he has, Wayne's World.
And
he's Canadian, too.
He's a Canadian guy, and the host happened to jive him a little, give him a little joke about Canadians, the backward Canadians. And Mike Myers, this is before I knew real history, Mike Myers gave this quip like, yeah, well, we kicked your guys' butt, if you recall. And at the time, I'm thinking, what's he talking about? They kicked our butt when? I knew about, Benedict Arnold and the American Revolution. I said, okay, is he talking about that? No. He was talking about the two times William Henry Harrison got smacked down in 1812 when America used the War of 1812 as a pretext to get aggressive and add to their territory.
Yeah, then he turned around and started kicking the Native Americans' people's butts.
Yeah, somebody they could handle.
Out in Indiana, yeah. Also, there was fighting up on Lake Champlain. There was a disputed territory up there, and even the United States, was accused of impressing British sailors. I mean, and then as much as they go in and torch D.C. and break for lunch and never come back, they go to Baltimore and it doesn't work out too well there. I don't know what that was about. And then you have the war. You have the Battle of New Orleans, which was after the war was over and shouldn't have never happened to begin with. The whole thing
but Al, that is the battle that gets stressed in American history textbooks. They don't talk about the Canadian part, what our shameful action in that. They just talk about the Battle of New Orleans, which was irrelevant.
And I can't speak to it now, but I just find it interesting. I mean, you could spend years on the War of 1812, but there was something going on down there with the Battle of New Orleans and everything with regard to slave trade. So that's another whole thing. But the point is, and I think this happened in our formative years. Okay, so we become what? We're all right now. We're recognized as a country in around 87, I guess. They throw out the
article. That's when the Constitution was finished. 1783 is when that Treaty of Peace was dictated by King George.
And then we operated under the Articles of Confederation, and actually, I guess it was James Hansen was de facto president under that law of the land. Then the Constitution came in and kicked out the Articles of Confederation. But what happens is, whenever we were getting too big for our britches, it seems we got a bit of a kick to the butt to put us back online, and that happened in 1812. and of course in the Civil War. And I think after the Civil War, it was understood what our role was and not to act up like that anymore. And we did. And within, 40 years, we wind up with this, like, global fighting force that Theodore Roosevelt was told to show off. And now we become fighters from that point on. And as I said before, now our run is coming to an end, as all runs do. No country believes it's ever going to lose. I guess that's the way that France felt about Napoleon, Germany felt about Hitler. But it does come to an end, and ours is certainly headed in that direction. We've had it good, but that day is over with. And the return to yesterday is not going to happen.
I suppose that's the other thing, that all countries and all armies think of themselves. They all think that God is on our side, and they all think that we can't lose because of that. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, all we're saying here is, look, we've had it decent. We admit that, okay, there are a lot of people as individuals and as racial groups or ethnic groups who have not had it all that great throughout the history of our country. But be that as it may, we are a republic, and republics don't last forever. In fact, they have about a 200-year, I guess, average lifespan, and then it doesn't work anymore. Whether that's done deliberately, and I think it is, or if it just happens because it's in the human, gene pool, then
well, if you look at the Reconstruction, ours only lasted less than a century.
How do you mean that?
It's been over contractually since that Reconstruction era.
What's been over?
The Republic. Because as Montgomery writes, once you deny a Republican form of government to some states, you deny it for them all. We've been under military rule since the Reconstruction.
That is true. Yeah, there was a redistricting, again, as the informer and I had talked about, when they made the military districts out of the South. They actually did it to all states from that point on and forever. So, again, like we said, we have a parallel universe where you have the United States as we see them on a map, the contiguous 48 states and Hawaii and Alaska, and then we have the districts.
This is where we get district courts today.
Yes. So, again, there's two Americas in a sense. There could even be more if you want to get down to it, but actually, I mean, without getting too crazy, there are two Americas, or two United States of Americas, and there's two of us. Each of us have two personas. And I don't want to get caught up with that. I had noticed early last year, I kind of became aware of a lot of people who are all into this and the legality of it, which to me, it's like reading a phone book. I could care less, but that's the devils are in the details. It's true. And I just don't want to. My point when we did stuff in years gone by, it was like, look, let's get the reality of the United States and what we're dealing with. We are not always the good guys. This is not going to be a happy ending. And we have been propagandized since we could read and enter school. That's all I'm saying. It's just the way of the world, which is why I love that poem from Robinson Jeffers called Be Angry at the Sun. He wrote that in 1944, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said, hey, look, every empire takes its turn on the wheel. They rise and they fall. And that it's going to happen here. If you're going to be angry at that, then be angry at the sun. Meaning what? Don't waste your breath. It's just the way it is. And we don't realize we're in that stage now. But it's not going to be a happy ride from here on out. I'm not going to put a figure on whether it's going to be 10 years, 20, 30, or whatever. But whatever we thought we had, in essence, is certainly not coming back again. And what we were talking about before about presidents being basically whores, and they are, and the senators and congressmen who make a living out of being down in the District of Columbia, they know the way it goes. If there was an honest one that was ever in there, they spend one term and they're gone. Or they hang around and just get ostracized and get reelected in their own states. They come back and they're not allowed to play nice with other children. That's just the way it goes.
As Ferdinand Lundberg documents in his 1967 book, The Rich and the Super Rich, which of course is out of print because he was exposing the people who own everything, including the publishing houses, he documents how the politicians, and including the president, The politicians and the CEOs of the big corporations act as the gatekeepers for the people who really run this country, the dynastic oligarchical clans, the Rockefellers, the Pews, the DuPonts, the Morgans, the Fords, the Carnegies, the Mellons, and just a few others, Vanderbilts. So look at the title of the book, The Rich and the Super Rich. The rich are these gatekeepers, the politicians, the CEOs, maybe some of your upper echelon actors and actresses. But the super rich, the ones who really run the show, those are those clans I just spoke of.
Yeah, and it's been like that almost from the foundation of the country. You know, you go back, the Roosevelts go back, at least on the Delano side. And, of course, I guess the Roosevelts were one of the early patroon Dutch families that came over and set up on the east bank of the Hudson River.
But we hear people complain, the public complains about how much CEOs make. They don't even know the half of it, of course. The reason, this is what Lundberg goes into, the reason that the politicians and the CEOs are paid as well as they are is because, like I said, they are the gatekeepers. They know the secrets. They're trusted with the keys to the kingdom, to the truth about the fortunes and who runs the show. And so they have to be they have to be given a salary that would keep them quiet. They do not want to lose that salary.
What we're talking about is really that the only conspiracy is the history you don't know about. And you don't know about it for a reason. It's not because it was wacky and it got squelched rather, because it was crazy stuff. No, it is actually the true stuff. What we're seeing and what we've ingested since the time we walked into public school or Catholic school or whatever parochial schools, right? So whenever you walk into the education system, you're given revised history. That's revisionist history. That isn't the real stuff. That's the revisionist history. And the stuff that they call revisionist history is really the real stuff. And that's just the way it goes. That's propaganda. Education is propaganda. It's good to read and write, know that 2 and 2 is 4. But beyond that, you get a heavy dose of propaganda. And that's why we come up thinking what we think. And I was going to mention that one of the books I thought was excellent, again, a suppressed title, like Lundberg's was. The guy who had the publishing house that had the Chapanekas to put the stuff out was kind of a groovy guy. You know, he was eccentric and rich, and he was willing to put Lundberg's books out. Well, there's another one out there that never saw the light of day called Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Renee Wormser.
Oh, great book.
Yeah. This guy was a counsel and an aide to 2 commissions in the 50s that were tasked with finding out what in the world these tax-exempt foundations, of course, run by Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, blah, 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 all right, the same usual suspects, what they were doing to change the landscape politically and culturally in the United States. And they were obstructed. So Wormser wrote this book and said, this is the way it goes, guys, and, have a day. So that's out there. And I have to laugh because when you look at Wikipedia, don't fall in love with that because that's also propaganda. And I'll tell you what another one is, Snopes. Snopes isn't squeaky clean. And I had a little exchange with them. But at any rate, when you go to Wikipedia about Renee Wormser or whatever, or the Cox or the Reese commissions, that's what we're talking about. We call them committees or commissions. It's Cox and Reese. They said, well, they never really did find anything. This is Wikipedia's explanation, as if to say there was nothing there to begin with. Well, what do you expect Wikipedia to say? They're part of the problem, too, like all encyclopedias and mass-produced textbooks.
But they don't tell you why they never found anything. They never found anything because there was a hilariously obvious mole in their own ranks in Representative Wayne Hayes of Ohio. The man, during the actual investigation proceedings, was having conniption fits, vociferous ones, every 15 seconds,
right,
so that they couldn't even ask a question of the witnesses.
So that's how it goes, and that's what I say. There was probably, and there were attempts also. I mean, Kefauver at that time went after gangsters, and it was a really tumultuous time. We had McCarthy with the witch hunt. A lot of stuff went down in the 50s that really set everything else that happened to us in stone. But I also believe that a lot of what we would call good people who really have an idea of government, good government, just more or less found out, like Wormser did and like others did, that there's no way, an honest man can make it or an honest woman can make it down here in D.C. So
there is, of course, though, in that Wormser book, Al, remember, this wasn't on the record, but yet Wormser documents, anecdotal, his own life, a conversation Wormser had with a member of, I think it was the Ford Foundation, I'm not sure, but or the member of the Ford family maybe, where they told him that the foundations have done this. They've bought education for their own purpose, and he confirmed what Wormser thought. But of course, this was off the record.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, what we're dealing with is reality that was created for us to accept and believe was true. In essence, it wasn't. And we'll go on and on. We can go on and document this, and we probably will. But it's just to share with
that old axiom that the victors write the history books. That's only half true. There's another part to that. The victors write the history books and then cover up their own tracks.
Yeah, well, that's it. They don't seek the glory in the public eye because they have untold power. Going for headlines is like what Hollywood does. Actors and actresses, let them make the headlines. These people understand true power and how to keep it.
Yeah, that old axiom, another saying, the power behind the throne. They are it.
I tell you what, why don't we hold it right there, because there's something I just want to throw in as a real good example of the history you never heard about. Are you okay with that at this juncture?
Sure, yeah.
All right, then we'll get out of here. I had always heard mentioned about the Russian Tsar in 1863 availing the United States of his two fleets, the Atlantic and the Pacific.
That's right.
Always heard about it. Sounded right. Sounded could be that could be the case, but I never really found anything until about 2 years ago. You certainly don't hear about this in any history book, from grade 1 through college. And I had always kind of wanted to, get my hands on it. And finally, one day I did. And this is, again, what we're saying about the only conspiracy is the history you don't know about. It started with this one magazine. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Maybe I'll make the PDF available, and if people want it, I'll send it to them. But it happened from where I got the first inkling that it was true from a quarterly out your way on the Looney Coast. It was published in the California Historical Society Quarterly. And the title of it is Welcome to the Tsar's Fleet. The subtitle, An Incident of Civil War Days in San Francisco. And it goes on with this story about the Russians bringing their ships off New York City and off San Francisco Bay. And the Russians came in and were really hailed as guests or heroes or whatever, or somewhat of, I guess, allies. And here's the deal. You have to remember that Russia got a bloody nose in the Crimea War, when Britain and France, I believe, for the first time, were allies, and pretty much kicked his own rear end in the Russian military. Well, I'm sure they were smarting about that. Now, here's where it goes. There was a moment, probably around 63 or so. That was a very key period in the Civil War. Lincoln's change of heart that got him killed later on, as evidenced in his speech at Gettysburg. But you had the British in Canada poised to invade the United States. You had the French in Mexico poised to invade the United States. We were shaky. We were on wobbly legs because of the Civil War. And it was a thought that the two countries would come in and, of course, share the spoils, perhaps. So Lincoln, understanding the situation he was in. Now, the beauty piece, the story they give for public consumption is that those ships came over to aid, and this is true also, the Union fleet from being harassed very effectively by Southern ships. And what they were doing was the Southern ships were faster, smaller, and able to hassle the bigger ships that the Union had and disrupt trade and other things. So that was true.
Yep.
But also, it was because of this threat on both our borders. And it would make sense because at the time, Russia was willing, or it said so at least publicly, that they wanted to get their ships out of Russian ports, I guess especially before the freeze, because they were at it with Britain still, and they were afraid that Britain would come in and scuttle their fleets while they were in port.
Landlock,
right.
Bottle them up in the harbor.
Yeah, because the Crimean War was, I guess, pretty much over the fact that the Russians wanted a warm weather port from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean through the Straits of the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, I believe it is. Okay.
And the Brits had bottled their ships up in that war.
So they're willing to have another fight. So they came over, and I forget how long they spent, but it says this in the article. I'm not going to read it. I'll see if I can get a date on this.
What you're getting at, one thing you're getting at, right, Al, is that we almost had World War I almost happened in 1863.
Well, they took the squabble from Eurasia and brought it over here. The quarterly was released. That issue was published in March of 1947, and it goes through this whole thing. I mean, this is hilarious. In New York City, they gave the Russians a parade down Fifth Avenue. I mean, it doesn't get more conspicuous than that.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I did to just see if that were really true.
They helped put out a fire in San Francisco.
Yeah, they helped
Russian
put out
sailors.
right, and there were some injuries amongst the Russians. Yeah, definitely. What I'm looking for here is if I have it. Oh, I got it. This is great, folks. There is a source, an information source. The link is Chronicling America, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. And you can go in there and you can go back into archive newspapers. They don't have the New York Times because they have their own. But I mean, you can go into. And I'm doing this here. I wanted to find out whether or not if I could find that episode in American history in a New York, not a New York, but a U.S. paper. So since one of the cities involved was New York, I looked up the New York Tribune. Let's see. New York Daily Tribune, Friday, October 2nd, 1863. All right? And here on a front page story says, and this is what they call the tombstone headlines, where you have one column and you have a number of headlines. They've gone back to that a little bit nowadays. So in this particular article, they have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what they call decks. And these are the headlines. Our Russian guests. Second headline, hospitalities of the city extended to them. Third, grand military and civic parade. Fourth, review in the City Hall Park. Fifth, reception at the governor's room. Excuse me, and there is a sixth. Speeches of Mayor Updike and Admiral Lasovsky. And the New York Tribune, and all during that period in October, and for the time that they stayed, there are stories about the Russians being here, and we have never even sniffed a scent of that in any of our educational academic textbooks. That's amazing, isn't it? You got to love that one.
Whitewashed, erased history.
That's what I'm saying. Now, what is the problem about putting that episode into our history books? Is that because post-World War II we were supposed to hate the Russians and we could never know that they were our allies? All right. But what I'll do is I'll end with this. We'll get out of here. There was a toast at this gala that they threw for the Russian Navy, and Lasovsky gives this toast to Lincoln. The man to whom you have entrusted in the moment of your difficulty the future of your country, and the man who enjoys the enviable fame which every man must, that of being an honest man. And they clicked their glasses and they toasted Lincoln. That's amazing stuff. So go to that website, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. Oh, by the way, I'm just looking around now for some of the papers and the stories they give out about both Buchanan's attempted assassination, that would be James Buchanan before Lincoln, and McKinley's
That's another
assassination.
erased history episode.
Well, I'm telling you, you can see what always happens, whether it's 9/11 or whatever. The very first reportage is probably the most accurate. And then the spin meisters come in afterwards and start giving out the story that everybody's to ingest for public consumption. So I was just looking at McKinley, and it's the three stories it had. This was 2 days after he was shot. He didn't die right away. It said McKinley's signs are good, everything's favorable, he's going to pull through. 3 days later, he died. Also, they were saying that the lone gunman, Shulgash, had an accomplice. Where have we heard that before? And then there's a third story, and this is the best. You remember the story about how Shulgash got next to McKinley at the Buffalo Exposition?
Yeah, he had like a towel wrapped around his hand.
He had a handkerchief or something wrapped around his right hand, which was hiding the gun there. So there's this like handshake line with McKinley, and there's Secret Service there. And this guy comes up with his gun and shoots McKinley twice.
Hello.
So the story is, geez, how come those guys, didn't catch him? Well, assassinations aren't done by lone gunmen, folks. All right, we'll see you next time.